We're ready.
All right, it's been time. Commissioner, you're aware that Commissioner Kerner is going to be late.
Mm-hmm.
Good morning.
We're going to call the special meeting of the Solid Waste Authority of Palm Beach County to order. Will the clerk please call roll call?
Vice Mayor Bernard,
Here.
Commissioner Kerner, Commissioner Valashe,
Here.
Commissioner Burdick, here. Commissioner Abrams,
Here.
Commissioner Berger, here. Mayor McKinley, here. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Commissioner Kerner is running about 5 minutes late, so when he comes in, he'll be recognized. Mark will be running late also. Dan, can you lead us in the invocation and pledge to the flag?
Dear God, bless this meeting convened in goodwill for the benefit of those we serve. Give us the strength to overcome the obstacles we shall surely face and the wisdom to make good use of the opportunities we shall surely find. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have proof of publication?
Yes, we do.
Can we get a motion to receive and file the proof of publication? We have a motion by Commissioner Berger, second by Commissioner Burdick. All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously 6-0. Next item, Palm Beach Renewable Energy Facility number 2. Mr. Pelowitz, you recognize.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Romana Carey for the presentation.
Good morning. This is amendment number 3 to REF2 Operations and Maintenance Agreement. In April 2011, the authority entered into a design-build contract with Babcock & Wilcox and KBR. And in July 2015, the facility went into commercial operations. But there's still some remaining items in the construction contract to be completed. And this amendment would transfer the funds remaining and the responsibility for completion to the O&M agreement. There's no additional cost to the authority.
Any questions to staff? Commissioner Burdick, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, I don't know if it's appropriate for this item or the next item, is with regards to any covenants with is Bond Counsel here? Did you check with Bond Counsel to see if transferring this item at this time is appropriate when we have not closed out the project?
We had our legal counsel involved in that, and maybe he can answer that.
No, I didn't check with bond counsel. I apologize, but I don't think there's any issue with the bonds at this point. We're simply transferring the
Operations of the and maintenance, but the project has not been completed and closed out yet.
That's what we're trying to do with this. This would help. This is going to allow us to close it out.
The design-build contract allows for the transfer of the responsibilities, if there are any remaining items, into the O&M. It was the same entity that bid on this thing, Babcock & Wilcox. And PBRC is a subsidiary of that, and, they would assume all the responsibilities.
So what we're saying is that the original builder, design-build contract, is not able to complete the project at this time, and we are turning it over to another entity to operate and maintain and do all of the punch list items, and there's 3 or 4 pages of punch list items.
No, this is the same entity. When we assigned this project, the operations maintenance agreement, it's PBRC, which is Palm Beach Resource Recovery, and they're a subsidiary of Babcock & Wilcox. So back in 2016, I believe, we assigned that thing immediately after it went to the commercial. And So they are responsible for everything. And it was contemplated in the design-build contract, and it's exactly what we're doing, because we were expecting some items to be unfinished. This closes out the construction contract, because they have like bonds and everything that are pending.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
And they're
so-
not,
and
they
they're
haven't
still
completed what they were intended to do under the contract.
correct. And all the responsibility, every item on that list is being transferred over, and the funds approximately 1.
Seeing Commissioner Abrams, you recognize?
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of item 4A, the Amendment 3 to the O&M agreement.
Can we get a second? We have a motion by Commissioner Abrams, second by Commissioner Berger. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously 6-0. Next item. Item 4B, Palm Beach Renewable Energy Facilities Number 2, continuation of supplemental combustible waste supply. Mr. Pelowitz, you recognize?
Yes, Mr. Vice Mayor. This item, as you're aware, back in June, we advised the board that LGL Recycling, the company that we had a contract with for the delivery of supplemental waste, had exercised their right under the contract to terminate the agreement. That termination was effective the first week in July. We have an RFP on the street seeking to obtain contracts with one or more other suppliers to supply supplemental waste going forward. That RFP's response is due next week, and we expect to come back to the board in August with a recommendation based upon what we believe is the best deal for the authority. In the interim, we are requesting board authorization to continue to receive this material at the rate that was in the LGL contract in the interim until such time that we have another contract in place. This represents over $1 million in revenue for the authority if we can continue to do this. And it's consistent with the terms and conditions of the contract we had in place. With that pretty much explains it.
Any questions of staff? Can I get a motion for item 4B?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve 4B to direct staff to seek supplemental waste suppliers.
Can I get a second? We have a motion by Commissioner Abrams, seconded by Commissioner Berger. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 5-1 with Commissioner Burdick dissenting. Next item, item 4C, Solid Waste and Recycling Collection Franchise Agreement for Service Areas 1 through 4 and 6.
Yes, Mr. Chair. This is intended to be an opportunity for the staff to obtain direction from the board as to this bid, RFP, the collection bid or RFP, and the contract documents. What we intend to do today is we have about a 15-minute presentation, if it's uninterrupted, but we do anticipate the board will have questions during the presentation, and we do appreciate those questions. Following that, I think we're looking for some direction from the board as to what programs, APIs, what affirmative procurement initiatives go into place as it relates to the passage of the disparity study, the options under the disparity study, and also in terms of the competitive, the type of procurement we're going to do, bid, RFP, several service-related options that have been raised, and then finally a recommendation for a cutout area, cutout of service area 2 that would be specifically directed toward trying to increase prime contractor utilization for the MWBE community. With that, we have a presentation.
Before we begin, so what we will do is we'll do the presentation first, and then we'll have questions to staff, and then we will open it up for public comments. I think we have, so far we have 5 cards, and then we'll go into the recommendations by the commission. Let the record reflect that Vice Chair Kerner is here.
Good morning. I'm Mariana Felposh, CIS Operations Manager. Board approved the 2018 Solid Waste and Recycling Collection Pre-Qualification Language and Franchise Agreement language, but extended our current contract for a year to implement the findings of the disparity study. Today, staff has some items to present requiring board direction for the 2019 franchise agreement. First item is the pre-qualification requirements for service areas 1 through 4. This comparison chart shows the approved pre-qualification requirements on the left and the proposed pre-qualification requirements on the right. You will notice the experience requirements have been reduced in an effort to increase bidders and competition. Next item for your consideration is to identify the level and type of residential curbside collection services. Haulers have expressed a concern in attracting and retaining qualified CDL drivers and helpers due to our manual 6-day work week schedule. During the past 18 months, we have noticed a significant increase in liquidated damages, incomplete routes, and customer complaints. An alternative to our current manual collection service with 6-day work week would be an automated 5-day work week schedule. With this schedule, all services would be single day, including garbage. Haulers would be able to use 2 types of trucks. Automated would be a truck with a hydraulic arm picking up standardized containers, or semi-automated, which would be rear load trucks with tipping devices on the back. Many counties and cities have already made this switch with great success. This schedule would help haulers attract and retain the qualified personnel and provide them with a better quality of life. It would also alleviate 33% of our residents from having Saturday service. No one would be skipped with the schedule. For Thanksgiving and Christmas, there would be Saturday day service, but that would be the only 2 weeks. Standardized containers would be necessary, and they run about $50 to $70 per unit. Haulers would initially purchase these containers, and we would establish a $2.10 per month line item in the contract to purchase for the purchase, delivery, and maintenance of these containers. These containers are very durable and easy to maneuver. They're 96 gallons and can fit about 2 to 3 of the current size garbage cans allowed. Next item is the yard waste service. Currently, we have a 6 cubic yard weekly limit, and an alternative to this would be a 3 cubic yard weekly limit. We would have an established $8 per cubic yard for any residents that have larger piles for collection. Next item would be the proposed service area 6. This is a map of the proposed area. In green, we have the gated communities within this area, and it would be a cutout from service area 2. This is the estimated number of residential units within the area and the annual estimated proposed commercial. Ms. Colleen Robbs.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. My name is Colleen Robbs. I'm the coordinator for the Equal Business Opportunity Program, and the policy was approved by you in June. The purpose of this program is to ensure that all segments of the business population, including small, minority, and women business enterprises, have an equitable opportunity to participate in the authority's purchasing process. This morning, I will present to you the proposed application of the EBO program and discuss the following: method of procurement, proposed evaluation criteria, who is eligible to bid, sample scope of work, calculating participation, affirmative procurement initiative evaluation criteria. We'll talk a little about service area 1 through 4 evaluation criteria, and then the required forms. So the method of procurement for the carve-out Area 6 is proposed to be a request for proposal. The affirmative procurement initiative that would be applied would be the Competitive Business Development Demonstration Project. This is an API that was included in your deliberations and the policy. This particular API encourages the development of new business capacity, as well as addresses the barriers for formation and successful diversification of minority women business enterprises. This slide illustrates the evaluation criteria that the committees will evaluate the submitting firms. You'll see that it's management experience and operational plan, financial capacity, price, SMWBE plan, local preference. These are proposed evaluation criteria scoring. The next slide will give you information on who's eligible to bid. This particular carve-out will be for a joint venture. We intend that the joint venture makeup will be an established firm or team of knowledgeable and experienced experts in the industry with a certified minority women-owned business enterprise. Sample scope and some of the responsibilities may include, for the JV, hands-on training to certified SMWBE firms, for example, cost estimating, bidding, staffing, fee collection and reimbursement, and so forth. Hands-on demonstration on how to perform the necessary tasks in the field, which is the primary scope of work. For the certified MWBE JV, their responsibilities may include actual solid waste collection and disposal, as well as other roles such as recruiting, organizing, and managing the team of MWBEs. This slide gives you an idea of how we will calculate the participation. You'll see that we'll start with revenues and take out disposal expenses. This is paid to the authority. We end up with net revenue. Then we'll take out franchise fees that are paid to the authority, and we're left with the dollars for SBE participation. So this dollar amount would be multiplied by the 20% goal to get the actual participation. This slide illustrates the API evaluation criteria. You'll recall that we're going to propose the competitive business demonstration project. And with that, it requires a JV. The point award is total 15 points. For the JV component, 5 points. And the JV participation for an MWBE is on a sliding scale. maximum 5-point award. To continue with that, for subcontract participation, there will be 10 points, 10-point award for subcontract participation. And you'll see that we have proposed that 5% or more participation for SBEs will receive 2 points, and 15% or more of MWBE participation will receive 8 points, for a total of 20% participation. I will note that the JV MWBE could fulfill some of the participation requirements of the subcontractor, provided they perform a commercial useful function. This slide gives you an indication of our proposed plan for areas 1 through 4. A different method of procurement, this would be an ITB. The API would be SMWBE subcontracting goal, where we are proposing 20% participation, and the aggregate would be 10 for SBE, 10 for MWBE participation. The required forms for pre and post award, we have the utilization plan, which is made up of the participation schedule, where the submitting firm would list all of the firms that they intend to use, and then the intent form, which they would complete with each certified S or MWBE firm. A submitting firm may request a waiver, and this would be for good cause, and fully documenting the subcontractor unavailability despite their good faith efforts to comply with the API in the solicitation. They would submit a subcontracting goal waiver request form. This form would be submitted by the respondent during the written period in both the RFP and the ITB. It will be approved by my office in collaboration with the user department, and the outcome will be provided to purchasing, and they would post it in an addendum based whatever the response. The post award form that's listed here for compliance, we will have the awarded firm to submit monthly subcontractor supplier utilization reports. Thank you.
And finally, you'll see a schedule here where we're requesting board direction and decisions. Actually, we're requesting board direction on most of what's been presented here, including the scoring on the RFP, the structure of the program, the goals to be achieved. All of those areas are areas that we require some input on in order to finalize the RFP structure and documents to be presented to you in August. And with that, that completes the presentation.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Valasche, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of the evaluation criteria, I see that one of the two largest areas in which you're evaluating firms, one of them is financial capability. How is that going to be measured?
Typically, what we look at is we're looking for letters of references from financial institutions. We're looking for a letter of commitment from from equipment manufacturers that they intend to sell equipment to the company in the event that they're awarded the contract. We look at financial statements if they're available, the most recent 10Qs, 10K type reports. There may be companies that don't have audited statements. We'll look at unaudited statements. The intent here is to ensure that they have reasonable capability to acquire the equipment necessary to do the work.
Sure, but wouldn't that tend to bias this towards the larger, more established firms? I mean,
Yes, it would. And what we're presenting here today is the API that we have. I agree with you that the way it's presented, it could lean this more toward larger, more established firms.
and wouldn't it be, I mean, suggestion would be you sort of determine which firms are financially capable, and it's binary. Either they are or they aren't, and each firm that passes that bar gets the 30 points, because it seems like it's going to be very subjective if you're actually going to use the whole range of 0 to 30. How enthusiastic are these letters that, you're getting from references, and seems a little too subjective to me. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree that an RFP does lend itself to subjectivity in these areas. We could obviously put in place a pass-fail determination up front. That's how we handle our bids. The bids are a two-step process with a pre-qualification phase up front and then a bid opening at the end, and it is more of a pass-fail.
Any further questions?
No.
Mayor McKinley, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure I'll have more questions, but one that I had almost immediately in relation to the carve-out area, the proposed area. A large portion of that is my district. Are these current household numbers or projected? Because we have approved a lot of development in this area.
Good morning. Those are the current most up-to-date house counts and commercial cubic yards, roll-off pulls. So to answer your question, those are current to date.
Okay, would there be any adjustment as households start to come online? I mean, there's probably a few thousand units that have been approved in this area, with more coming on the agenda next week.
Yes, we received this from the county, all the new COs. Haulers are aware of it. We're aware of the growth, and those are all included with some vision looking ahead for anybody bidding on this area. So yes, we do take account for all the new homes coming on board.
Okay, and what would the backup plan be if the hauler in this particular area doesn't perform?
We're hopeful that through this process, we won't have to deal with anything like that. There will be success. However, if there is not, we have a backup plan with Service Area 2. This was part of Service Area 2. It's not perfect. We'll have to sit down and discuss exactly what we would do. But I can assure you we will make sure garbage, yard waste, and recycling is picked up. If we do have a problem, we'll bring in resources to make sure during that time.
Okay, and so just so I'm clear, so what we're asking is one of the large providers to do a joint venture with a new hauler and basically teach them the tools of the trade so that then they can grow and become that other person's competitor?
That's what, as far as the disparity study and the program, that's what we came up with for this area. There was talk about joint ventures with a group of different businesses, minority and small businesses coming together. But at the end of the day, this is what was created. A large company working with a small minority, small business company.
Okay, and then my last question for now on the criteria. So we've now made our local business providers the absolute lowest priority on this entire process. It's no longer important to hire local. mean, there are only 5 preference points for local. I thought that we were still going to maintain a concentration on making sure we support our local businesses.
That is true, and we do the MWSBE. In order to qualify as an MWSBE under this program and to have that count, they must be local. So they have to be local firms, local domiciled firms, and provide evidence that they are local. The contract also provides a program that, an element that requires local participation. In the event that your subcontractor supplier is not an MWBE, they're required to emphasize local on top of that. So this is just the evaluation points this is the breakdown of the evaluation points that was included in the purchasing manual modifications that the board previously approved that were presented and drafted by Franklin Lee in consort with staff. So under the current policy, 5% local is the number.
That's all for now, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. In regards to the local preference point that the mayor mentioned, are we able right now to change the evaluation criteria and increase the local preference point?
Yes, this is one of the issues we were seeking board input on. The board has the authority to modify these recommended weightings of these various criteria to whatever the board wishes is appropriate. I mean, we're looking for a consensus today, obviously, that would help if the board has input on that. We certainly are looking forward to it.
Mayor, do you have a preference in terms of increasing the number points for the local preference, and where would we take it from?
Well, when I look at this evaluation criteria as a person responsible for effectively spending our taxpayer dollars, price proposal to me would have a higher possible score. So I agree with Commissioner Valasche that financial capability ought to be a yes/no and a pre-qualification. And so if we were to do that, then I would take the points from that area, since that would no longer be the evaluation criteria for the final selection process.
So how many points would we give to the financial capability if they meet that point? Do we move it completely, or do we? I think I'd like for us to keep some points for it, so in that way, if they do meet the pass or fail.
Well, let me ask staff then, because right now we have a pre-qualification. So if somebody didn't pre-qualify, they wouldn't even get this far into the evaluation criteria. Are we eliminating the pre-qualification process through this?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Under the service areas 1 through 4, we're currently proposing that those would be the same as we have done it, which would be a pre-qualification phase with a hard bid. This is the first time we've done an RFP or proposed an RFP for collection. So this is new. When you do an RFP, the pre-qualification really is embedded in the scoring process. So if someone's financial capability was really poor, they would score very low in that category. And that way, that's how you would measure it. So the pre-qualification is really built in this case.
Okay. Then with that, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that we use the same criteria that we're using on one of the other slides here, where it was 10% local, 10% MWBE. So I would do 10 on that and 10 on local. I can't remember where that slide is.
Okay, so we've got management experience and operation plan. Would we suggest that we keep that at 30?
Are you asking? I'm welcome for other board input.
If I can help, I think if we focus on the areas where you think the point totals are too low and determine where you would like those to be, then we can adjust the management experience operations plan and financial capability down in order to accommodate those points, the movement of those points.
Well, I agree in terms of increasing the local preference to 10. Any of the commissioners have any objections to increasing to 10? Mm-hmm. Commissioner Abrams, you're recognized.
Sure. Is there any chance to do a hybrid where we do a pass-fail even though it's an RFP and then proceed with the qualifications under the RFP? Anyway, something to consider.
I mean, that's possible.
Okay. In regards to the small minority women business enterprise, the scoring point is 15. I know for me, I'd like for us to keep that at the 15. Does any of the commissioners have any objections to that? All right. And then, so in regards to the price proposal and financial, so we are only short by 5 points. So do we want to decrease the financial capability by 5 points? So now it would be 25 points.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I mean, you don't necessarily have to deal in increments of 5. I mean, if you want to take 2.5 off one and 2.5 off another, you'll have a better balance without. I assume we don't have to deal in increments of 5. All right. Okay.
Well, we only have 5 that we've taken off, so I think
right. But I mean, you could reduce 2 of them by 2.5 points or something if you wanted to still have a closer margin.
Commissioner Kerner, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if I'm going out of order here, I have a question specific to the issue that Mr. Commissioner Abrams has brought up and Mayor McKinley. So I'll address that first. If we're making this a threshold issue on the financial capability, don't we then, if that's a pass-fail, don't we take those 30 points out of the equation altogether? Is that the math?
That was my point.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most logical. And then we have 30 points to work with. So the process would be yes or no. If it's no on financial capability, they shouldn't move forward, and then we can redistribute at 30 points as the board sees fit.
Okay.
And then I do have a litany of other questions, but you can come back to me if you'd like.
You can ask the questions.
Okay. Let me just say up front, I'm not really buying into the joint venture model. I don't know if there's a consensus here. Mayor McKinley's brought up a great point. I want to thank Ellen Smith and Neil Schiller for bringing this to my attention. I had a very frank conversation with Mr. Hammond yesterday, I believe. I think the joint venture just ended up in there because that's what Franklin Lee brought forward. The reality is it's got to be an independent company that comes in and has a chance to succeed on their own. I don't understand. We're disincentivizing the joint venture relationship disincentivizes a good faith attempt to bring a new company to the fold. And so as a threshold issue, I'd like to see if the board can agree that we should do away with the joint venture model and make it sort of an independent effort. To me, that's the biggest issue we're facing right now. So that's my question. Are there any commissioners that think we should retain the joint venture model?
Mayor McKinley, you recognize.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, on that point specifically, I like the idea of a carve-out. I like the idea of a company coming in and proving themselves and standing on their own 2 feet. My only concern would be to make sure that we have somebody lined up to cover that area in the event that performance is not met.
Mayor McKinley, I know for me, like I've always thought of if it was going to be part of Zone 2, that when we do the bid for Zone 2, that whoever wins that zone would be the backup company if that company failed, and that whoever, if it was, since it was supposed to be part of Zone 2, that when they were bidding, if that company failed, they would also take over that zone. That was like my thinking is.
So, Mr. Chairman, would then the contract for Zone 2 have to come back and be amended before the board?
No, like, I don't think they would have to be amended, but they would agree to service it under the same. I think that's something that we can work on in terms of how it would work.
If I may,
recognize.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, to put something in there of a hauler doing a service area and then taking over, it takes a lot of equipment, resources. We have a better, I think, mechanism to take care of that rather than trying to put this on hauler in Zone 2. I mean, they don't have the equipment just sitting around. We have a way that we can get this picked up. We have different emergency cleanup companies and everything. I really feel that following this process and the fact that we have people in the field, that there will be success checking off each of these points. There may be some challenges, there may be hiccups, but we will be there to make sure that it is successful. So I would just encourage we don't get too involved in service areas 1 and 4, that our backup plan staff will get together and come up with a backup plan that probably will use the equipment that the current company that took over the area or won the area, and we'll work through that. I really believe if we follow this criteria, it'll be successful. It won't be perfect like any startup, but over time, I think we'll get there.
Okay. Easy to say that when the majority of it is not your district. So.
Well, Mayor, that's the reason why, like, I believe that, since it is in your district, I know I would lean to, what makes you more comfortable, because it's your constituents that are impacted, and we want to make sure that it is successful. So we definitely would, lean to you to help us decide what are the mechanisms to make sure that it is safe.
Right. In all fairness, it's also District 2 and District 3. So there's 3 of us. I just have the largest chunk of it.
Okay.
And so long as we had significant measures in place to take care of that situation, I'd be comfortable with that. On the evaluation criteria, if we do keep financial capability in there, I would suggest 25 points for management experience and operation plan, 25 for financial capability, 25 for price proposal, because I think that is equally as important. Yeah, maintaining the 15 for the SWBE program and 10 for local preference. And if I did my math right, that adds up to 100.
That's 100%. I think Commissioner Valasche recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of Commissioner Kerner's point, I'd be interested to hear when we had public outreach about this, how the joint venture proposal was discussed and received by the participants in our public outreach. Personally, I tend to agree with Commissioner Kerner because I don't feel like it's our role here to coerce, I don't know if coerce is the right word, but to create business combinations in the private market as sort of a mandate from the from this board. But anyway, what was the tenor of the discussion?
We had a great event, and I would say there were 4 to 5 small companies that express interest in bidding on this particular area. The other thing, just to add a little bit of
As a joint venture? Or,
no,
solo.
Solo, on their own, maybe a joint venture between 2 or 3 of them.
Okay.
But there was no big company, large company mentioned. The other thing, just to add perhaps a little bit of comfort, when we do award these bids and when the board approves them, there's a checklist that each hauler has to go through, so we will stay on top of that for the cutout area. And what I mean by that is to make sure they have all their equipment in a timely manner and everything that they must have as far as collection employees. There's dates that they have to have that before the startup. So we'll have ample time to make sure we have a successful startup in the new area.
I guess my question is, right now you're proposing for it to be, it must be a joint venture. Can we leave it up to the proposer to say whether they want to do a joint venture or if they want to do it by themselves, like a small company who wants to do it by themselves?
I think as staff, I think we would prefer that. I agree on behalf of staff that opposing a required joint venture could be an impediment to competition and to bidders coming in to participate in this market. And I think we also envisioned the potential for an MWBE firm to come in and provide this service as an MWBE prime. The struggle we're having is that the program that was put forward and the program that was passed had this this joint venture concept in it, and we're trying to fit this contract into the APIs that were created. I believe if we can relax the joint venture requirement and go to something that allows for more flexibility in terms of who bids, we as staff would certainly support that.
On that point, Mr. Chair, how does the scoring matrix work or change as between an RFP that embraces the joint venture model and one that does not? And how do we weight that so that we're not putting a preference on one model over the other?
In that case, you would, as in the 15 points that are broken down as it is now, there are 5 points, I believe, that are set aside for the joint venture concept, with a sliding scale from 5 points for 51% and up MWBE composition down to lower points for less MWBE competition. So you could increase the points available for a pure MWBE that bids. As a suggestion, that would incentivize an MWBE coming in and actually bidding on this or submitting a proposal on this contract over perhaps a joint venture that's made up of a large firm with a large established Caucasian male firm with a smaller MWBE firm.
So are we then incentivizing the non-joint venture model in a sense?
I believe.
Which I like, to be honest with you.
I believe we would. What I'd like to do is maybe get Franklin Lee on the phone and check with Franklin Lee. What we originally floated was a sheltered market concept that was more geared toward MWSBE primes performing this work. And I think what you're talking about is kind of allowing for that type of a proposal from an MWBE firm that is not necessarily a joint venture.
Mm-hmm. Well,
yeah, I'm on standby here. If anyone wants to ask me questions. This is Franklin Lee.
Hey, Mr. Lee. I think before we hear from Mr. Franklin Lee, I'd love to hear from, since we have comment cards, do we want to hear from Franklin Lee first, or do we want to hear from some of the cards from the public?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any preference. I just want to ensure that I am able at some point to discuss another aspect of this, which is the single day versus twice a week pickup. So whenever you get to that, I have questions on that.
Okay. Do we want to ask Mr. Lee? Yeah, Mr. Lee, please start away.
Yes. I wanted to comment on a couple of things that are being discussed here. The initial concept of the joint venture between an MBE and established waste hauler was intended to accomplish two things. Number one, to make sure that you had someone on that prime team that could step in and make sure that the collections are undertaken in the proper manner. in the event that the SMWBE firms that had signed up for this project were not able to stand on their own and do it on their own. There's two components to this competitive business demonstration project. One is simply to do the waste hauling work, which is important and a primary objective. But another equally important objective is to provide an opportunity for your small indigenous firms, including minority women-owned businesses, that want to diversify into some aspect of the waste hauling business to get training, hands-on training for doing so, including a curriculum. This is not, it's not a normal contract for a waste hauling firm to be teaching other firms various aspects of the business. But it's something that's necessary if you're going to create a cadre of firms that will be eventually able to bid either as subcontractors or as prime waste haulers in the future. The model for this was in a water sewer industry contract that took place with Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission, where they were trying to develop pipe contractors, and they didn't have any. And so the commission in that instance did the training in the field and trained other contractors how to become pipe contractors using heavy equipment, training them how to bid the jobs and manage them. And then they got a cadre of pipe contractors out of that that lasted them for decades. In this instance, what we're trying to do is make sure we have some minority women business participation at that joint venture level. Sheltered markets are not constitutional. So you can't just say we want the prime to be an MWBE prime. So that's what where the joint venture model comes in. It's not excluding non-minority firms from being a prime contractor for this contract. Also, you have to keep in mind that we had some discussion with staff, I guess about a week ago, over how you handle the costs for this. This contract for this little carve-out is going to be more expensive than any of the other contracts for the amount of waste that's being removed, because you've got an additional scope of work beyond just simply picking up the waste and disposing of it. There's some teaching going on here. There's some recruitment and organizing that has to take place to make sure that the small and minority businesses are getting a real opportunity to learn the business from the ground up. And whether it's just replacing tires, towing broken down vehicles, supplying and maintaining the containers that you're using, all of these aspects are commercially useful functions within the industry, but you don't have the indigenous businesses locally that can necessarily do all of that without this project. But because this project is going to be more expensive, there's a very real danger that you're not going to have a whole lot of bidders on this if there's no real benefit to it. Because it's a much smaller area than the other zones. I think no prime is going to want to do it unless there's some advantage that they may be able to gain from participating in this somewhat unique contract. Some of the things that we kicked around as possible sweeteners for firms wanting to be willing to compete for this would be to get additional points, additional evaluation points for the other 4 bids, for the other 4 districts, if they're successful in winning this particular competitive business demonstration project. In that way, the bidders would see that particularly new entrants that are trying to come into the market, they may say that this is a way they can get their foot in the market, get a toehold, and be more competitive in going after the other 4 districts. Another option that's actually built into the policy is if you could add on additional option years to those other contracts in the event that they're successfully performing on this pilot project, or this demonstration project, rather. So those are some of the factors that we were looking at. In terms of the joint venture model, it's been done successfully by the City of Atlanta, and also in airport concessions under the Federal Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program. It's been one way we've been able to promote prime contract participation in somewhat unique industries. And in Atlanta, they had a very aggressive joint venture model that worked well in construction. I can't say that there's a similar joint venture model that I'm aware of in the waste hauling business, but there are 2 other industries that I've seen where it's worked. So that was the thought process that went into developing this particular API, and some of the ways that we were trying to address the unique challenges in making it not just effective for the residents in terms of getting their waste hauled efficiently and cost effectively, but also trying to build a cadre of firms so that you have more competition in the future and maybe even better pricing in the future, because you've got some local indigenous firms that have diversified into the industry.
Mr. Lee, can we, what if we decide, what if there's a company who can do, let's say there's an MWE company who can actually do it on their own without a prime, would we still have the issue in regards to the price? And can we do that?
Well, that was another. Thanks for reminding me about that price issue. You talked about increasing the number of points for the carve out up to 25% for price. That could be a real problem, because the bigger firms that you've traditionally been doing business with have much larger zones where they're able to use their equipment. And if you have enough equipment available, you can shift equipment from one zone to another. Whereas if you're coming in as a prime, you're just dealing with this small carve-out, my understanding is it's just not going to, you can't be cost competitive having a bunch of equipment hanging around doing nothing, just sitting idle, if you don't have one of the other zones or a couple of the other zones under contract. It's just not going to be feasible for you to have all of that equipment sitting around for a little small carve-out like this. That's going to be cost prohibitive. So the key is, I think, trying to find a way to link, or to reward, I should say, participation as a prime on this demonstration project to being more competitive and going after the larger zones. That'll make it a sweetener or an incentive for the bigger firms, whether they're minority or non-minority, to also bid on this demonstration project. I also think if you take away the joint venture, if you're somewhat concerned about mandating a joint venture, it's preferable to perhaps giving more incentive points for firms to come in as joint ventures with an MWBE as their partner. Because we're still struggling with how do we get MWBE participation at the prime level. If you just simply have a local preference at the prime level, you're going to get probably some small firms that may, like you said, you may have 4 or 5 small firms there that are may be willing to compete for this little carve-out because they're at that level. But you don't have any MWBE availability right now. And you're not going to probably create any without the joint venture incentive.
Mr. Lee.
Unless you have, a larger MWBE that wants to come in and bid as a prime for that demonstration project. But like I said, I don't think any of the larger firms are going to want to do that unless they win one of the other zones.
Mr. Lee, can we technically set that zone for an MWBE company to bid it out, right?
That would certainly work, but I think there's a legal barrier to that. Under the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause and strict scrutiny that applies to these programs, the courts frown upon set-asides or sheltered markets on the basis of race and gender, simply because it excludes non-minority firms completely from being able to bid. The joint venture doesn't do that. The joint venture allows non-minority firms to also bid, and it encourages collaboration across boundaries of race and gender.
Okay. What about if we made it an S with an SBE or SMBE, SMWBE? Can we do that also? Would that?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I believe. Yeah. The language that we had drafted or come up with would permit. It wouldn't prohibit, a number of SBEs and MWBEs from joint venturing. It wouldn't prohibit 2 MWBEs from joint venturing.
Okay.
But it allows, it requires that at least one of those partners in the joint venture would be minority and women owned.
Okay.
Without that assurance, there's a good chance, I think, you would end up with 0 MWBE participation at the prime level.
Commissioner Cronin, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to kind of narrow the issues, and I appreciate the response. The 2 issues that Mr. Lee brought up was the joint venture is ideal so that a larger company can step in to make sure collection continues if it fails, which is a point that Mayor McKinley brought up, and I certainly share her concern. We've been assured by our senior staff that there's a model in place to protect our constituents should that model fail. The second one is that sheltered markets are unconstitutional. There's equal protection concerns, and I get that. We're not saying that it has to be a minority or women-owned business. We're waiting. We're actually giving points if it is, but larger companies can come in and bid as well. So I just hope we can find a consensus now that we've answered these questions that we can embrace both a joint venture and an independent model. Mm-hmm. Can we hash that out and agree on that?
No.
Because it sounds like the staff, and Mr. Hammond, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the senior staff is embracing both models, and I think it's good public policy.
I know that I would support, both. So in that way, the proposers can decide if they want to do a joint venture or if they want to do it on their own. So that's what I would support.
And not to mention, and I voted for this and have supported this effort, but I never had the intent as a government to force larger companies to have to mentor and train. I mean, there are issues of capitalism here that need to be balanced, but I don't think we should be mandating larger companies come in and train and mentor new companies. That's not how this works. We just want to make it easier for minority and women-owned businesses to compete, and both of these models can embrace that.
Can I just comment on that a little further? Under the model or the RFP model that I envisioned, you're not requiring them to do anything that they're not getting paid for. You could either look at it as a supplemental contract for the training aspect, and the oversight aspect, because there is additional work that's involved when you're working with firms that don't have any experience in the industry.
But we're passing that cost on to our constituents.
Mentor-protege model programs out here, for example, that permit for reimbursement for costs associated with that mentoring process. But if you conceptualize this as two standalone contracts that are working in tandem, one is the prime has responsibility to pick up and dispose of the trash. The other scope of work is the mentoring aspect of recruiting, organizing, and managing the use of these other firms, these enrolled firms in this demonstration project, as part of a scope of work where they're getting paid fair value for that service. That's what makes the contract, this demonstration project, more expensive per cubic yard of trash that you're picking up, because there's more services that the prime is providing. But they know that going in. It's spelled out in the contract as to what their requirements are. And so not all, I can imagine not all firms, not all waste hauling firms would be willing to do that. But if there is some incentive for them to make that extra effort because they get a leg up on the competition on the other 4 zones, if they are able to do that, then you're creating an environment, you're changing the rules of the game somewhat so that this type of collaboration then becomes a worthwhile undertaking.
Okay. Let's just make sure that we're okay with agreeing for it to be, they can do either a joint venture or they can, do it standalone. Does any of the commissioners oppose to that idea?
No, but I have a question on the cost issue.
Okay. Commissioner Abrams, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On this cost issue, I just wanted to clarify, because I understand the concept that the major company would have the incentive to do it if they were given preference on maybe obtaining other zones. But who pays the extra cost in this demonstration project, since we've established it would be higher? I mean, are we assuming the vendor will swallow that additional cost because there's some incentive elsewhere in our bidding for the vendor? Or would it be passed through? Or would it be passed through to the household, because to the ratepayer?
No, I would definitely not want to do it if it's being passed on to the ratepayer.
Oh, agreed.
Now, in the other models, and that'd be a terrible example to set up where basically ratepayers are being told. You're the lucky ones.
I can picture it now, Mr. Lee, telling the Fountains and Bellagio and Wycliffe that you're the subject of an SWA experiment and you will be paying extra.
Yeah, this is a project that's being undertaken for the good of the entire county and the entire waste authority to try to enhance competition in the future. You're making an investment. I see it no differently than you investing money in a renewable energy plant that comes out of, well, in that case, it comes out of capital funds for the whole authority. You don't charge one zone for that, even though the renewable energy plant is only located in one zone. I see it as a benefit for the entire county and for the entire authority, and an investment that should be paid for by the authority as such, and not passed along to the ratepayers.
Okay. Mr. Lee, what
you have different rates for different zones. And we had a little bit of discussion about this as well, at least I did with Mark Hammond. And from what I understand, there's some legal impediments to changing the rates on an across-the-board basis that they get set zone by zone based upon the mix of houses and commercial the circumstances within each zone. So I wouldn't want to disturb that at all. And so whatever ratepayers happen to exist within this carve-out demonstration project, they should be allowed to continue paying the same rate that they would pay otherwise.
Okay. Mr. Lee,
So
what
that's the waste hauling scope of work. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. We're going to hear from Mayor McKinley, and then we're going to take comments from the public. Mayor McKinley, you recognize.
All right.
I'm frustrated. I find it now we're talking about availability. You know, I mean, we just said that we have to do it this way, and there is no availability for somebody, MWBE availability to bid directly solely on these contracts because those companies don't exist. So if they don't exist, then how is there the disparity? But I'll leave that as a rhetorical question. How do you tell us that it will be much more expensive to operate in this carve-out zone and then in the same breath say it's not going to cost the ratepayer anything extra? Can somebody answer that question for me? Unless, you know, Waste Management or Ashbrit or some other big company is going to say, hey, I'm going to just pay for this out of my own pocket. I don't care if it's the capital fund, if it's the blighted neighborhood fund, if it's the ratepayer fund, if it's whatever fund, all of those funds are the same fund. They're the taxpayer. So how are you proposing to provide a much more expensive service for the same price that somebody in Commissioner Berger's district is paying?
If that's a question for staff, my answer is I don't know. We're an authority. All the money, all the revenue that we have comes outside of energy revenues and other things comes from ratepayers. So if there's an increase in cost, it's going to be passed on to the ratepayers. It has to be. There's no other way to fund it.
And Dan, can you give me or somebody just maybe an idea of what kind of dollar difference are we talking about here? Are we talking about $2? Are we talking about $200? I mean, has somebody run numbers?
I think really it's impossible to have numbers right now. And the reason I say that is we had a bid before with Southern Waste Systems, a very small company that came in and ended up bidding lower in the one area than all the large haulers. And they did an outstanding job. So if we open this up, I guess the comfort level we all share is that this will go ahead of the other bids. We'll see what we're dealing with on qualifications, on interest, and rates. And that, you know, I think is one option that the board has to look at to determine if we want to do this or not. And if we don't want to, we just add it into Service Area 2 and move forward. But I think it allows us an opportunity to move forward with all the time we spent on this zone, and let's see what the results are and then make a decision at that point before we put out the other bids. That's just a thought.
I can't support moving forward on this until I know what the financial impact is going to be for my constituents, period. I mean, I'm sorry, I watched what happened to my constituents in the city of South Bay and the rates that they have to pay because of the small population and the distance that has to be traveled. And I can't support doing something like that on an experimental program unless there's another option that we can be assured that these ratepayers are not going to get absolutely whacked.
Mr. Ochambo, my question is, can we have where we would decide all of this on the same day, and where whoever would bid on these people who would bid on it, we would make that decision on the RFP first. So we would have those numbers, and if those numbers are off from that zone, then we can put it into Zone 2.
That's what I was proposing to do. The other thing to look at in a small cutout area, this may be small to big haulers, but to small haulers, this is a big area. This is an opportunity. So don't be surprised. They may not have the overhead and some of the other things a larger company may have, and they may surprise everybody and bid a pretty competitive bid, as Southern Waste did. So I think that's the best way to move forward, is to take a look at the RFP. Once we do the RFP, bring it to the board, and you then can determine with facts on what you want to do moving forward with this cutout zone.
Or abandon it.
Or abandon it. So
that would be your policy,
risk.
And that's what it would be, is we would bring it back to you. If we got the approval to move forward, we would get going on the RFP, we would bring it back to you, and then you would make the determination what you want to do moving forward.
Well, are we asking then somebody who's bidding on Zone 2 to have to submit two proposals, one with the carve-out area and one without the carve-out area? Because I would think that might affect...
No, we would not do that. What I'm saying is we would do Service Area 6, RFP first. You would then make a decision as a board. If you're okay with the price and the rate from that bid, then we would go ahead and move forward with Service Areas 1 through 4. If you didn't like the outcome, we would just bid the other 4 zones, and that cutout zone would go back into 2. There's, we're not going to have any cutout or anything of that nature moving forward unless you approve it.
Commissioner Burdick, you recognize?
Gosh, thank you. I've had my light on and off and on and off because several of my colleagues have answered my questions. Back to the joint venture. I understand that some of our current vendors are not interested. Their business model does not allow for that. But there might be individuals, other folks that are not currently doing business in Palm Beach County that might be interested. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if we look at moving forward in this new carve-out to allow for the joint venture or allow for local businesses to
joint venture
on their own, how would it, I like the concept of you would get additional points or incentives to win other zones, the 1 through 4, if you provide that joint venture for the new carve-out.
That's a problem. And the reason, then you're looking at an RFP instead of a bid for the other 4 districts.
So that's out. Okay. That concept
yes.
is out. Okay. So that one's out. Going back to what you said about when Southern Waste Systems, staff was adamantly opposed to allowing the smaller business to come in. And yet we found them, they did a great job, highly capable, were very successful, and then they turned around and sold their business. If we were to move forward with this smaller, what would prevent this? There's nothing we could do to prevent this smaller venture from saying, after having the contract for a few years, selling their contract out to a larger company? No? Okay, so we can't encourage the larger ones, give them more points with the joint venture. We can't sweeten the pot because this is an invitation to bid. Okay, thank you.
Unless there's a way to get additional option years, that was the other.
No. We're limited by the Special Act to 7 years.
Okay.
Mr. Falcon, you recognize?
I'd just like to address the issue of passing through the costs and whether or not that would occur. This is the first I've heard of it not possibly being passed through. And I have looked at this issue in the past regarding the possibility of blending the rates in all the zones, because I know that that's been something that the board has asked about in the past. And I determined that that is not possible. You can't do that. the special assessments need to be assessed based upon the benefit conferred, and the best indicator of the benefit conferred is the cost in that particular zone. I think we'd probably have the same result here. I can look at it, but again, I think the costs would have to be passed through. But if that's the board's desire to not do that, I'll look into that one for the board.
I have a question on that point, Mr. Chair. Certainly, the rates need to be tied to the service provided, but as a sovereign government, aren't we empowered to provide a subsidy from other portions of our budget to lessen the blow? Tax and spend?
That's something I'm happy to look into.
Yeah, because that's a model that I think we're going to have to discuss at some point. First of all, let's recognize that the RFP may come back and may be cheaper than the other zones. There's a lot of market forces that could provide for that, and we've seen it in the past. But if it is, and by the way, I think we're abandoning to some extent the model where the joint venture is designed to provide all these training and mentoring opportunities. I don't think that's going to work out. But if the RFP comes back and it's more expensive, then we have to make, as policymakers, decision budget-wise how to subsidize that to make it fair to the District 2, the Zone 2, Zone 6 folks that I represent, that Mayor represents. And so that's something that is not ripe today, but certainly I think we're empowered to consider subsidizing some of those rates from other portions of the budget if necessary. So if you could look into that.
Happy to look into that, and I will get with bond counsel in this regarding this.
Commissioner Valche recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. In the carve-out zone, we're going to ask for RFPs. Then, if we don't like the answer, we're going to say, forget about it. There are costs involved. You know, this is not costless to prepare an RFP. And I think in terms of securing a letter of credit, perhaps, you know, all of these things that we talked about in terms of being financially qualified, firms are going to incur costs to this. And I don't see how we can ask them to go through the entire process of sharpening their pencil, doing an RFP, and then say, we didn't really mean it. You know, you're too expensive, and we're going to do something else. That seems very counter to the way we've done business and should be doing business, frankly, in the past. You know, there has to be some certainty involved in this. I think we need to decide beforehand whether, you know, I think Commissioner Kerner said perhaps the cost will be lower, but I think most of us think, I'm speaking for myself, but I think most of us think the cost will be higher because of economies of scale and, you know, newness, et cetera, in a smaller area. If we don't think we're going to accept higher rates, then I don't think we should go through the whole exercise and make these firms go through it and at the end of the process say, you know, no, you're not cheap enough.
Well, right now, what I want to do is go to the public card zone. That way we can hear from the public. Mm-hmm. Okay. The first person that we'll hear from is Neil Sheeler, followed by Chris. I'm not able. Shuley? Okay. Mr. Sheeler, you recognize?
Good morning, still. Mayor, Commissioners, staff, my name is Neil Schiller with the law firm of Saul Ewing, Arnstein & Lair, 515 North Flagler Drive, Suite 1400 in West Palm Beach. I'm here today representing Waste Management of Florida. We're talking about a primary function of government, picking up the trash. It is one of the most important functions that government does on a daily basis. We have some concerns with the franchise agreement, and we'd like to discuss them. The 20% MWSBE goal, you just heard from your consultant that there is zero availability. Zero availability. We heard that well, we know that the central bidder information system that is supposed to qualify and register MWBE firms has not been set up yet. So you have 0 MWBE firms registered with the county today. 0. And yet we're talking about numbers like 20% or 10% SBE, 10% MWBE on contracts that are going to be $1.2 million for each of that 10% as of today. And that is a very, very high bar to set when there are 0 MWBE firms right now. In fact, the demonstration project we just talked about is supposed to encourage MWBE firms to be certified. Great, but how does that affect service areas 1 through 4? It's going to be impossible. How are we supposed to find firms when there aren't any? So that is a major concern for us. How do we get there even if there are firms? Well, we are a publicly traded company. So to your point, Commissioner Burdick, we can't joint venture. So we will not be participating in a carve-out zone. And I just want to state that for the record. It takes a lot of money and a lot of capital and to be a waste hauling firm. Trucks, the insurance alone, employees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that is why there are 4 large companies that are your franchisees right now and not smaller companies. Getting to the 10%, subcontracting routes is really the only way that a large waste hauler is going to make that 10% goal, right? Subcontracting routes. And we can't do that because you get into operations issues, you get into liability issues, and you get into service issues. One extra sentence, Mr. Chair. Regarding the disposal credits, we fully support staff's recommendation to pass those through. We think that that's fair. Lastly, I'm here to answer any questions. We have our team here to answer any questions, and we'd like you to look at not necessarily lowering the requirements in the ITB.
I have a question for him.
Commissioner Burdick, you recognize.
Mr. Chair, through staff, is it correct that we do not have any MWBE firms?
Haulers.
And there are no MWBE trash people picking up garbage.
The garbage.
However, there are MWBE firms that do provide services to the haulers in a number of other areas. The fact that our central bidder registration system is not up yet, that's an issue. However, we do have access to OSBA, to the school board, to the water management district, and the state does MWBE certifications as well. So we're at this point, because we don't have a certification program set up, because the county's disparity study isn't completed yet, and because they haven't modified their program. We're quite liberal in terms of whose certifications we take. So there are resources available to the haulers to seek out MWSBE firms to perform on this work. But it is correct, specifically, there are no identified small MWBE waste haulers in Palm Beach County at this time.
But Mr. Schiller said firms.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Schiller, I would appreciate accuracy in the things that you say and not trying to mislead public officials. You said 0
MWBE firms.
Several times.
Yes.
And that was an inaccurate statement.
No, I disagree, Commissioner. I don't.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I actually was the first one to say it based on what Mr. Lee said when he was speaking to us by phone. He stated that there were no MWBE firms that currently supply this service that we are discussing today. So I would guess that that was Mr. Schiller's reference. Thank you.
Commissioner Kerner,
I don't
you
know.
recognize?
Mr. Schiller is a very astute individual.
Through the chair, Commissioner Kerner, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I hear Commissioner Burdick's concerns, but I didn't feel misled, Mr. Schiller. But I do have a question for you. if Waste Management makes a good faith attempt and effort to find or satisfy those requirements that you discussed that you have concerns with and can't do that, isn't there a safety valve in the board waiving those requirements? And if we do that, doesn't that become the same playing field for the rest of the people participating in invitation to bid? Isn't that what you told me, Mr. Hammond?
On the waivers,
Yes, sir.
at that time that was my belief, but after meeting with our attorneys, we believe that now if one firm who bids on this can meet the 20% and the other four can't, they would have to all meet the 20%. They would be asked to go back and meet the 20%.
Okay, and so it's a function of due diligence in some regard because all the companies are facing the same market forces and employment forces.
May I respond, Mr. Chair? So it was our understanding that as of the last meeting that every contract that comes before the SWA for procurement would be analyzed by staff in terms of availability to make that goal. All right, we said that, you said that, I think, and that was my understanding when I left the meeting. I don't necessarily believe that 20% for this contract right now can be justified or warranted. We've looked at it. We've gone to the Office of Small Business to look at every which way we could meet the goal. We are surpassing our SBE percentage right now in our current franchise. So we have a history of working with local companies, with certifying local companies as SBEs until there was an MBE program last month. So from our understanding, yes, there should be a good faith effort that if you cannot meet the goal and you provided enough documentation that you would not be penalized for not meeting the goal. However, as I'm an attorney, I want to know exactly what I'm getting into before I submit my submission. We are concerned that the inquiry period, almost the question and answer period before the ITB, the bid is due, may not allow any of us enough time to go out into the marketplace to find any MWBEs that may or may not have been certified or SBEs that may or not have been certified thanks to this new programs that you have approved just last month. And so there's a concern about time. I would advise my client that we want to know exactly how the waiver process is going to work. We want to know exactly what is going to be allowed and not be allowed. This is an extraordinarily large and important contract to my client. You are very large and important too. But this is a big contract, and we want to know what we're getting into, and I think you would want to know what you were getting into too.
And I have a follow-up, Mr. Chair, if I may. Your point's been made, Mr. Schiller, but at the same time, if anyone is best positioned to know the market in Palm Beach County to tap those resources that has institutional knowledge, it's going to be their current franchisees, correct? And
exactly.
So in that regard, if anybody can find and source MWBEs effectively, it would be Waste Managements of the world. And so if you guys can't do it, then the market dictates that. And everyone else faces those same market forces.
So that's a good question, or a good point, and I just want to reiterate something that I learned a couple of days ago. So there are two major ways, I think, to meet this MWBE and SBE requirement for the waste hauling bid, if it's going to be 20%. That is subcontracting routes, which has some major operational issues and challenges, and that is disposal. Right? So if somebody, if an MWBE or an SBE owns their own disposal facility, we could essentially pay that person to dispose of all of the solid waste that isn't brought here. I think it's vegetative waste. For us, Waste Management, we own our own disposal system. We own it because it makes it more economical for the ratepayers, and we always have control over that. That's important when you run a 24/7 operation like we do. So we wouldn't be able to go to an outside disposal provider because we already own ours. Further, if we get into light bulbs, pens, papers, widgets, tires, maintenance, all that stuff, large companies like Waste Management has national buying power. And we pass that savings on to the ratepayers. That's all incorporated into that low bid one price. And if we then are forced to go outside of that national buying power, to be frank, we're going to pass those increases on to the ratepayers. We're going to pass them on to our final bid, and that's just what it's going to be. But it's unfortunate that we're going to lose the opportunity to save money. Now, on the flip side, we have gone above and beyond working with SBEs and will work with MWBEs to certify them, to train them, to give them opportunities to advance within the franchise, as well as our 17 other contracts in Palm Beach County. The fact of the matter is, the availability you just heard was zero. I can't turn around and create 15 different SBEs and MWBEs. I would. That would make everybody's life so much easier. But right now, we don't think that the availability is there.
I have some questions for you, Mr. Schiller. Does Bruce Lewis represent you? Waste Management?
Bruce Lewis works for us. I think, are you a registered lobbyist? No? No.
So you're telling me that during this whole time, you have not worked or with any MBE or MWBE since we've been doing this whole discussion, since we've been having these discussions? You haven't gone out to try to go out and work with MWEs?
No, not at all. First, what? Yeah, we've actively been trying to find firms that will qualify as an MWBE. You didn't have any MWBE certifications until you just approved them last month. So we have gone out, we have worked with companies that will qualify as MWBEs.
And
but
so have they tried to get qualified as an MWBE?
I don't know. To be frank, I don't even know if the certification process is available for the SWA right now, but that's another separate issue. The fact of the matter is, yeah, we have gone out to look. We have met with the Office of Small Business multiple times to continue to call all of the SBEs that would be eligible to be MWBEs.
Okay, so you don't have any MWBEs right now that you're working with? You have not found any?
Would you like to hear from Mr. Lewis?
Yes, please.
Yes, so I'm the gentleman who manages the small business activities for Waste Management. That particular roster at this point in time is a work in progress. In prior years, I've been working with them for probably...
Do you have a list of those companies that you're working with right now?
Absolutely, that's what I do.
Can you provide those to us, please?
I could. I don't have that, available right now, but I can certainly do that.
How many companies do you have?
I'd say there's roughly, of the roster of candidates and prospects, probably over 30 we've talked to in the past. Most are SBEs. Some recently certified companies are MWBE companies. And so there's a mix because the county classifies, and you can designate what you'd like to be: a woman-owned business, minority-owned business, or just a small business enterprise. And so I see no real difference. A certified company, to me, qualifies to meet towards the goal. For this particular instance, you've carved out 10%. And, you know, there's going to be a process by which people are going to be a little bit more cognizant, small businesses are going to be a little bit more cognizant about how they classify themselves. For instance, I'm a small minority-owned business, so I can fit into either category. And I did that for a purpose, anticipating that things like this would come up with this program. So I think...
So let me ask you a question. So in regards to, so do you have any SW or MBEs, MWBEs that you're working with waste management?
Currently, right now, yes, there's several.
But they're saying that there's zero.
Well, in terms of the Solid Waste Authority's database, yeah, because that database is not completely up yet. But I would say that there's a fair amount, and I think there's going to be more that jump on board as a result of this program being implemented.
I think there was someone who was out of, I can't remember her name, she was out of the Glades.
Yes.
Is she working with waste management?
Yes. We're talking with her. We're trying to get her into the loop. She's actually gone through her certification. I think she submitted her certification application probably 30 days ago. I helped her with that, and she's going through the motions.
But there's still, so there's still zero.
Well, I guess if you look at raw numbers, Commissioner, right at this point in time, you could say zero, or I like to refer to it as a small business manager, a pending application. So that's where I stand on it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Chris Shuley, followed by Leah Gaines.
Good morning. Chris Shuley with Waste Pro. We service Area 1. We've been here since 2008. Just a couple of things I want to bring up. One is when we're going over the service, we feel it's very imperative that we do the 5-day work week with the workforce we have, and it's so hard to bring people in through the door to do this. It's a tough job. 6 days a week right now during the summer. I mean, it's just hard to retain people. We've had to increase our wages probably over almost 30% since we started the contract. But we think that 5-day work week is essential. The other one is the yard waste, 3-yard limit. Area 1 has probably the most yard waste generated. And you want to have a 3-yard limit, you know, we're for that. Just want to make sure that if it's a 3-yard limit, that is what it is at the curb. Not 20 yards can go at the curb, and I take 3 and I put a tag on it, and they call and say I was never there, and we keep going back. So I think it's imperative that we have that limit. That is what's at the curbside. If it's over that, we tag it over, call us for a quote, and we'll come back. For the joint venture, that is not something that we can't say would not, but very likely that we would not entertain. I think if you're going to have a carve-out zone for someone to come in, then let them bid it and let them go out there and do the work that is required. But for a joint venture, it's just something that we cannot take that liability of another company under our name. Something happens, somebody gets hurt, or worse, you know, we're on the hook for it. They're going to go after the deep pockets, and we just can't take that risk. You know, I mean, if you're going to have a cutout zone, then put a company out there that can do the job. That's why we have requirements in bids. You know, so find them and put them out there. I think that's a great idea. If you put the bid together, maybe put in there an option for each hauler to put a price in for that area 6, that if someone doesn't do the work, you have prices that you know, you can go back to a hauler and say, this is what you proposed to do this work if this other company can't do it. But for a joint venture is just something that I don't think we're going to entertain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hold on. I think Commissioner Burdick does have a question for you.
Thank you. Well, I guess it's really to staff. How would you determine those 3 yards, and how are we going to provide the public information to areas in those communities so that they're aware of it?
As you know, we took a big step going from unlimited years ago to the 6 cubic yard.
Yep.
And as I always say, any change can be challenging, but we've adopted, and as Chris mentioned from Waste Pro, service areas 1 and 2 are challenging. Big lots, they generate tremendous volumes of yard waste. Residents do put out 20 yards. We always go through this situation where they pick up 6 yards today. Nobody knows what 6 cubic yards really is. Everybody has their own vision of what 6 cubic yards looks like.
Right. You got to tell them it's 1 refrigerator or 2 refrigerators and give them a visualization.
And you know, the reason for this, it's a very difficult job picking up yard waste for 1,200 homes a day with 6 cubic yards. If you look at other counties and cities, many of them have adopted the 3 cubic yards or require it in veg to be in containers, hand tied so an employee can just grab the twine and throw it in the back of the truck and continue on their route. We, over the years in Palm Beach County, have provided an unbelievable level of service for our customers. That comes with a cost. The challenge we face today is all these companies have nice trucks, but we don't have the employees to operate them, and we all need to be concerned because we need safe operators within our communities providing this very important service. So I know it's tough to tell a homeowner that you're only allowed 3 cubic yards. In fairness, we only assess for 7 cubic yards a year because that's what the waste generation study has demonstrated. So the only way to make that up is on the collection side for a hauler. That deficit, the extra equipment, and that's why prices will never be the same throughout the county. There will always be a little bit of a difference. But I think with proper education and the option of $8 a yard to go and pick up your 20, 30 yards, whatever you have out, is a very fair option. But it's not going to be perfect. We're going to do our education with our team here, and you know, that's up if the board approves that. So,
well, I support it. And you know, there are some of those large lots out there, but within 1 and 2, there are some very small communities, and they are in fact subsidizing those large lots. They pay some of the highest, besides the Glades area, they pay the highest rates in the county.
And like I said, it is a waste generation study, so it is an average spread out, so there are benefits on either end. South County has less garbage and yard waste than North County, and this is an average to do the assessment across the board. But the 3 cubic yards, what we're seeing today seems to make sense, and I know it's difficult in our northern areas to accept that, but really the $8 rate is a very fair rate, and it doesn't apply to everybody. It's just those that don't want to put out just the 3 yards. They do have a viable option to have it removed within 72 hours. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to have Leah Gaines followed by Joanne Stanley.
morning, Vice Mayor Bernard and Solid Waste Authority Board. First, I want to thank you and the staff for getting us to this point. I think it's been a lot of deliberation, and I think all of you bring up some sound points. I do, however, want to share some things that I hope that you would keep an open mind about. The first is the value of joint ventures. The Small Business Administration has really been that administration nationally, which has really shown the world the value of joint venture. Practically all of the federal departments, from Defense, Energy, all of them, HUD, all of the Department of Airports that flow through our local political subdivisions, all of them include joint ventures. And all of them have been very successful in expanding opportunities in the market. Many of you talk about the free market and forcing the market to do certain things, but that's basically what your role is as commissioners every day. You force the market to give you back what you think is in the best interests of all of your constituents, as well as you do it every day with policies. When you talk about local preference, you're forcing the market. When you talk about small business participation, you're forcing the market. So it's really a way to open markets. If you can think of it that way, I think you'll have a better understanding. In your scoring, I think you can, you've heard from the staff about the possible backstops, but in your scoring, you can talk about and give points in the approach or operations section. And I really would like to see that separated out from experience so you can really focus on that and talk about infrastructure soundness, operational efficiencies, delivery. That way you know up front what you're going to get. Also remember, this is an RFP, so you have that ability to negotiate as well on price. So I'd like for you to keep all of those things in mind. And one other thing on the SMWBE participation formula, I know you talked about, I know you talked about it would basically consist of revenues minus disposal expenses. I just want to make sure today we're talking about expenses above and beyond the disposal subsidies. I want to make that clear because that has been one of the points of the stakeholders in the stakeholders meeting that was very strongly presented, and we wanted to make sure so that it's really based on the total value of the contract within reasonable parameters. Also on the availability issue, if I may, Mr. Vice Mayor, on the availability issue, there is hauling availability. Technically, in the disparity study, there was no review of availability on waste disposal and collection per se. But the hauling is actually a separate category. So you can split hairs. So in the JV, there may be opportunities for small haulers to team. I also think you need to keep an open mind to ensure that consistency for delivery of service and those operational efficiency, as well as project managing and building capacity for smaller companies. You keep in mind the option and keep it open for a prime with a small firm as well, an existing prime. Keep those things open.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a question to John. One of the questions that she had said was to make sure that the expenses are above and beyond the disposal, which is the total value of the contract. Is that?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
It's the total amount of revenue billed, not collected, total amount of revenue billed, which includes container maintenance, all their revenue minus their commercial disposal and franchise fee.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Joanne Stanley, followed by Brian Thompson.
Good morning, Joanne Stanley, Republic Services. First and foremost, Neil did a great job explaining what it's like to be a large corporation and how we try to do business here and partner with the authority. I'm handing out some stuff that I won't have time to actually talk about, but those are some of the advantages that we're looking for in the new contract. One is automated services, the other one is a 5-day work week, and the third one is 5-day work week automated services, and once a week garbage collection. So those are the three, and in there it just gives you a few ideas of some of the advantages of having that, but we're looking for that. Back to the joint venture stuff, again, like Waste Management or Public Services will not be able to participate in the joint venture. We're sorry to say that our company just doesn't do that, for one. And we were looking, I've been looking, last time go around I was here, we found these small SBEs and we worked with them, and we've been working for the last 5 years to build these SBEs, get them certified, and now it's a WMBE, and I understand that piece, but Neil was right in that 1.2 million for WMBE. I mean, we can get a lot of small vendors to do little things, but nothing for the hauling unless we do subcontract that out. And again, there's we come up with issues with liability and operational issues. So that's really, you know, I want to reiterate that. That's kind of a hard sell for our corporation to say, yeah, we're going to subcontract all this out, but yet we are liable for anything that they do wrong or anything that they miss. So that's really what I have to say. And then, interesting enough, when we looked at the school board, and I looked at the South Florida Water Management District yesterday, and the list of all those WMBEs, they're great, but not, again, they're not haulers. They're, you know, they're contractors or professional services. They're not actually doing the services that we need for this contract. And this contract is very specific, comparable to the county. As you know, I mean, it's fuel, it's truck maintenance, you know, it's that stuff that, and we're not going to buy trucks unless we buy it from a national company. We can't do that for the safety of your residents and for the safety of our drivers. So I'll be here to answer any questions if you have any. Thanks.
Joanne, I have a question. In regards to the 10% on the SBE, are you able to meet that?
Oh yes, we've exceeded our SBE across the board for the last 5 years. So we have partnered with SBE firms. Some of them are WMBEs. We're in the process of getting them certified for the WMBEs. Just depending, will they be certified in time for the RFP to come out? I mean, we're really short on time. It takes, I think, 6 months really for the certifications to come through. So for you to have this mandatory mandate, these are certified, it's going to be really hard when we submit this bid if they're not there. So the bona fide effort piece might be something we can look at to say, okay, well, we can't get there now, but we're working on that. We're working on getting there until we can get these firms actually certified. And that's what we did last time around when they changed it from a WMBE to an SBE.
Do we know how long it takes to get certified with the county?
60 days.
Okay, so 60 days.
That's a complete application.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
That wasn't like that 5 years ago, though. Okay, thanks.
We're going to have, is it Brian?
Yes.
Brian Thompson, followed by Tina White.
Yes. Good morning, good early afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Thornton, Director of Operations with Republic Services. And I just want to echo some of the sentiments that have been shared around the room about the importance of automation. I really want to talk about safety, safety of our employees and the motoring public. It's number one priority for us that our operators, our professional drivers are safe in our communities. This industry is probably, you know, the top 5 most dangerous industries in the nation. And the primary reason for automation is to really get our drivers from the back of the truck, or helpers, and get them in the truck and really cut down on work comp. With the world that we live in today, unlike we lived in 10 years ago, 15 years ago, distracted driving is probably worse than drunk driving. Our drivers, there's more near misses than you can imagine. There's probably been some near misses out there in our industry today with distracted driving. So the more we can push automation to get our drivers out of the roadway, off the back of the trucks, and then get them in the truck, that'll help us. There's only 3 million plus CDL drivers, professional operators in this country. And if it was easy, everybody go get a CDL, but it's a professional certification. And within that 3 million CDL drivers, there's a litany of regulations and requirements to withhold that CDL, one of them being a medical card. And because of the aging workforce, there's about 60,000 plus bubble in professional operators. So it's getting tougher for us to get drivers into this industry, but more importantly, recruit and retain those drivers. So one of the things that will help with that is, as Waste Pro and some of the other haulers mentioned, is a 5-day work week. Currently, there's regulations around how many hours a driver can operate today. And I think that to make it safer for our drivers and the communities that we serve, that a 5-day work week, and obviously Solid Waste Authority will be able to balance some work-life balance with their employees also without having them working on Saturdays. That is very, very critical to us. Automation would obviously be aesthetically pleasing to the community, uniformity with the containers out so that the neighborhoods look good, they're nice and clean. It also helps us encouraging folks to recycle, but more importantly, it cut down on the wear and tear of the trucks through the neighborhood. So the critical component that I really want to drive home today is automation will help us also diversify our workforce. The system now is more of an athlete-driven system with helpers on back of the truck, and they got to be in very good shape to be able to pick up 15 to 20 tons. It equates to about 30,000 pounds on a daily basis. And it will help us diversify our workforce and keep them out a lot longer. So once they get to that bubble, they can work a little longer in their career. But more importantly, we can take ladies and put them in the truck. Currently, we have over 300 residential drivers in our Florida market. 23 of them are female drivers. And of the 23 female drivers, they're in our Jacksonville market, our Tampa market, and our Volusia market, where we have automated systems where they can get in the truck and be more of an operator and not have to deal with the labor intensiveness of it. So it certainly have benefits to it. And I thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Hold on a second. We have Commissioner Burdick, you recognize?
Thank you. Have you ever gone out and looked for unconventional workers? We have some areas in Palm Beach County where the unemployment rate is exceedingly high. And I wonder if you as a business or some of the other businesses have gone out to some of those communities and established programs to provide the training and opportunities for them.
Yes, ma'am. We believe in partnering with everyone. Well, actually, we got this program statewide where we're trying to get 18 years older and up with the CDL regulation, so that we can get those folks that want to go out and work in this industry. The problem is the way we do it today.
The way your business does it too?
The business model today with the rear load system, and what folks not wanting to work on back of the truck because it's tough labor intensive work, and the regulations around how tough it is to get a CDL. You got to have good driving record, got to pass permit, got to pass the proficiency test. It's highly regulated. What drivers do on duty count against them off duty. So that professional certification that everyone holds in the professional realm, that driver has that same one. And so it's a tough regulation. So not only do you have the issue of drivers that may not meet the minimum requirements when it comes to medical, but they may not meet the requirement also when it comes to the point system they're regulated in 2 buckets. So we do partner with communities around Palm Beach County and around the nation to try and get folks out of school or get folks that want to be into that professional driver realm.
I'm going to add to that. Yes, our HR department, we have been trying to partner with Career Source. We had a big job fair there, and the job fair there, we've been working with the LGBT community to bring in some people, and we've been looking at actually had a conversation with Melissa about sitting down with West Tech to see what we can do on helping partner with them to bring in some new CDL license, applicants and so forth.
And maybe reaching out to our homeless coalition also might be another avenue to explore.
Actually, we have that. We have a few employees that came from the Lord's Place.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, okay, I have one other question.
Yeah, go ahead.
And this is to Mr. Lee, if he's still on the phone. No?
Yes,
okay.
I'm still here.
Okay. Earlier, we had an individual talking about costs and how they look at going nationwide, and it's my belief that sometimes some of these large corporations they're the umbrella corporation, and they have numerous satellite businesses under their corporation, and those are the businesses that they go to do all their purchasing. Do you have any belief or understanding that by participating in encouraging more minority and women business programs, that it actually spurs competition and can possibly provide a greater value and reduce rates?
The answer to that question is an emphatic yes. Going all the way back to my days as an antitrust lawyer at the Federal Trade Commission, where we did actually look at joint ventures, for example, between General Motors and Toyota to develop small cars back in the 80s, up to more recently with minority women business programs where they've encouraged joint ventures. Like I said, the City of Atlanta has been very, very successful in promoting new capacity development and enhanced competition. There's a number of reports that we actually shared through our stakeholder process on the policy deliberation. A number of reports from places like City of San Antonio, State of Maryland, and others that show that with enhanced competition, prices have come down. Great benefits to the community in terms of having greater capacity, increase in jobs, increase in tax revenues with those minority women businesses as they've grown over time. So there's an increasing body of evidence to show the benefits of these approaches. And we've actually built into your Equal Business Opportunity Program some mechanisms for doing those types of analysis and measurement as you go forward with your program. I can also say that the more inclusive the marketplace is, the more you're able to include small minority women-owned businesses into your contracting process. The more bidders you'll have, the more competition, the prices will stabilize or come down. If you have the opposite take place, where just a few firms, you have high market concentration with just 3 or 4 firms in the market, you tend to get higher prices over time. That's just a principle of antitrust market analysis.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kerner, recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to make sure that we're, as we're endeavoring to do the right thing here, we're not missing a larger picture, which is if we go to automation, I assume there would be lots of jobs lost. And so I'm wondering, you don't have CDL drivers on the back of trucks, right, typically?
Most cases, we try and go driver. So we give the driver. In some markets where we have the capacity to do that, here we do have some drivers. So the driver and the 2 drivers rotate, and the helper don't take the burden of the work all day long working on back of the truck. So it could be a mix.
But there are helpers, and that's a job classification that is, there's no implication that they're a CDL driver.
Right. So for the helpers that we have today, the vegetation, if you decide to keep the bulk or vegetation in the current system, then we'd have to use a rear-load truck. So the helpers would be shifted from the current application to the rear-load application with the vegetation or bulk.
Well, let me just ask the direct question. If we go to automation, whether it's semi-automation or full, what are the implications in terms of lost jobs?
It depends on, the zone. It depends on the designs of the route. It depends on the specs in the RFP. In most cases, in some markets, there were, because of the bubble of what we have and shortage of CDL drivers, we try and take our helpers and get them into a CDL role. So we're currently working with our 20 helpers today and trying to get them into a professional driver operator role. So it depends on the mix. It could be a loss. It could not. Depends on again, the scope of work that's out there for the ITV.
I assume there's plenty of helpers that you admit will never be a CDL driver, though.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what happens to that segment?
So those senior helpers that we have with our organization, we take them and put them on a rear-load truck with the yard waste or vegetation. because you still have to have a rear loader in order to provide that service, and not unless you decide to put it in a cart. And then if you do, that'd be a manual service, and you still have to have, if you got a rear load truck, you still have to have a driver and a helper on the truck.
Can you give the board a general idea of how much, this is going to be a difficult question, so I'm not asking for specific accuracy, but what types of reductions in rates do you think we could see from automation versus the current model? It's kind of a perspective question, but we would anticipate reduction in overall cost, right?
That's a tough question. Okay. That's a tough, simple question because of the cost of the equipment.
Right.
The cost of automated trucks are going up. The cost of steel is going up. The cost of complication of the trucks and components, the operation of the trucks are increasing. So where that cost, where you may take that helper off the truck, may go away. That cost of steel is going up, possibly. So it's hard to say that we can, you see a reduced rate.
So it's possible we go to automation, effectively eliminate some important jobs and not see a reduction in the cost.
Can I interrupt real quick? Yeah, with the helpers piece, we can take them off the truck for the MSW, but we're going to have to put them on the trucks for the recycling because you now are requiring split body rear load dual stream recycling. So those helpers will now be going on picking up recycle because that's the new, that was the specs that came out before. So, you know, we're going to just be shifting them around and different things, but we're not going to be losing the helpers. We're going to need those to pick up the recycling.
Right. So the scope of work on the services you provide determine the workforce. So to Joanne's point, we'll shift those resources with split body. Now what we do, it's one person on the truck and they have dual compartments. If it's split body, then there's two compartments on the back of the truck. There's a rear load that has really a panel in the middle, and now you have to have somebody load the truck from the rear, where now it's just to help the one driver's getting out every stop himself and loading it on the recycling system.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mayor McKinley, you recognize.
Quick question. Could you maybe highlight some of the quality of life benefits to your employees and to those neighborhoods that you perhaps serve on a Saturday?
Can I do that? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll let you.
Yeah, okay. We actually service Commissioner Berger's area, and there are, our routes are kind of unbalanced down in District 3. We can't service certain areas because of the Sabbath, and we're not allowed to in there, so that kind of has always kept us kind of unbalanced. The advantage of the 5-day work week is, I mean, our guys will have 2 days off instead of 1 day here and 1 day there, because we're 6 days right now. So the only real day they have off is Sunday. So if they have a Friday and a Saturday off, that's a whole weekend where they can be with their family. Same thing with the Solid Waste Authority. They have a whole weekend they can be with their family. That's great quality of life and gives our drivers time to rest, which is what we look at. And our company has standards so that we will not let them drive over 12 to 14 hours. And then they can't come back to work for another 12 hours. So there's a lot of new rules and regulations that DOT has come out with. That's why we're really kind of pushing for this automation and really life-work balance for our drivers. And community-wise, Saturdays the kids are home when they're not in school. So nobody will, the trucks won't be on the road on Saturday mornings. You as residents aren't going to hear the truck drivers coming in at 6 a.m. to dump your garbage. So that's another reason. So, I mean, it's Saturday, if you do that, it just changes the whole outlook of the neighborhood. And also, what he was saying, it's aesthetically, it makes it much cleaner because no garbage is going to be flying on the ground. If the wind blows, it's all going to be in the cart. So it's, and we are looking for, we agree also with Waste Pro on the cubic yards. And if you're not going to do that, please, we need to look at trying to educate the residents to bundle, because right now they can just stick it loose at the curb, and it's an absolutely nightmare for our drivers to pick up just 10 yards of yard waste that's not bundled or prepared for us to be able to put in the back of the truck.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. And I know you've got a pretty good inside track to the Homeless Coalition and those
just
members.
A little bit.
So thanks.
Thank you. Last person, which is going to be Tina White.
Good morning. How are you? I'd like to bring some things to your attention. In the bid from 2008 to 2013, Waste Pro under the Solid Waste was charging the Glades area $42 a month, and that was passed on to the poorest people in the county. When I made that point, that is when the staff recommended that Southern Waste System be offered a piggyback because they were already servicing Pahokee and South Bay. Now, when they were sold to Waste Management, they are now also a piggyback, which is Zone 5. You just recently this year approved an increase for Waste Management in that zone. That increase was not passed on to the ratepayers. It is coming out of the Solid Waste Authority franchise fee. If I'm incorrect, then staff will correct me. But as far as I know, the increase that was approved for Waste Management for Zone 5 is coming out of the franchise fee. It is not being passed on to the ratepayer. If that's not true, still this point, staff has said consistently that they expect in this bid for rates to increase. If you are going to do the joint venture, which was approved, you adopted that program when you approved the plans on June 20th. To take it aside as a separate and look at the numbers and make a decision about the numbers without looking at what the numbers are in Zone 1, 2, 3, and 4 simultaneously would be wrong. Because you won't know if you're going to look at Zone 6 independently of Zone 1, 2, 3, and 4 as to whether or not those zones have also increased in rates that could be comparable to what the joint venture rates will be. I support the joint venture. There are primes that plan to support the joint venture with the MWBE. The current haulers had opportunities to develop minority and women-owned businesses in all the years that they've been working and doing business for Solid Waste Authority. They chose not to. In 2012, when the SBE program was introduced, all of the haulers said they weren't going to be able to make the 15%. Now they brag that they're exceeding the 15%. We know that there are 10% or greater qualified and get either certified or in the process of being certified MWBEs that can provide meaningful functions to the industry, such as temporary employees, which they have, such as the dumpster repairs. We have welders that are certified by the state that can provide those services, vegetation. So there are MBEs now. If the other companies have not done their due diligence and sought them out, that's not our concern, but there will be primes that will be meeting the MBE 10% subcontracting requirement. Thank you.
All right, we had one more card, but since he submitted his card late, I'll just recognize that Mr. Kisnell-Teus is here on behalf of our Representative Al Jaquette, District 88. Thank you. Commissioner Abrams, you're recognized.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, can I just go back on the automated issue and ask staff some questions? I mean, does automate, if I support automated, but does that require then a 5-day a week or once a week pickup? I guess is my question. I'll leave it at that.
Yes, because of the fact that if we go to a 5-day work automated, the cost would be astronomical to go to a 2-day pickup. You would have Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday, and park equipment Wednesday.
I mean, the city of Boca Raton, if I'm not mistaken, is fully automated.
Oh, you can do it 6, yes.
For years, but they do 5-day work week, 2-day pickup, automated.
Yeah, I think the one challenge we have with that, if I can, is, as John stated, yes, you could do automated 6 days. You can also do automated 5 days. The challenge we have with 5 days and twice a week pickup is you're going to have a Monday, Thursday, and a Tuesday, Friday, and on Wednesday, the haulers are all going to want to pick up vegetation and recycling. And the authority cannot handle a solid day of vegetation coming in. So in order to balance those schedules out, it's very difficult to do. A city like Boca can do that because they're imposing the burden on us. We would be taking half the county and imposing a burden on ourselves to try to handle 100% of the vegetation generated in this county that comes to us on one day.
So there's no way you could re-examine that? You're certain that that would be...
We've looked at it. I don't see any way we could do that. And as it goes back to the automated, the question was asked as to about cost-related automated versus manual. The real cost savings here that we would see would be going to the once-a-week garbage.
Have we done any kind of customer survey on that? Do we have any indication how? There may be areas of the county that would acclimate to that. I don't know if in South County, in my area.
I've spoke to a lot of
received.
counties that have done this transition, and the truth is it's going to be tough for 4 to 6 months. If you do any type of a survey, and we've done plenty of them, before every contract we do a survey, we meet with homeowners, associations, and communities. If you have the best service ever today, you're not willing or you don't want to change.
Correct.
And that's what we have today. So to answer your question directly, the high percentage would like to stay with what we have today.
Well, I think you'll find, just speaking for my neck of the woods, that you'll find support for automated. You'll find support for 5 day a week. But
2 days a week.
2 day pickup, reducing that, that's going to be tough.
I agree.
Well, Commissioner Burdick, you recognize?
Thank you. Are we going to the second to the last page for board direction and
Yes, we are.
discussion? That's where we're at right now? Okay.
So on the second to last page, board direction decisions, I know that I don't want us to stay here for too long, so the first is a pre-qualification requirements, the approve of the proposed changes. Any questions from the commissioners? Any? Commissioner Burdick, you recognize?
I guess that's on the pre-qualifications are on page 3. Correct? I don't have any objection to staff's recommendation here.
Yeah.
The maximum award and the limited award.
Is that those, Dan? Okay.
Okay. Then the second one, solid waste services, automated, the 5-day work week, 1 day a week for the service. I mean, these are large, I don't know, I live in a city and we have those large cans that you are proposing. I don't know what unincorporated has for the, and those cans are fine. They're easy they're nice rollers, they're solid, they have a good lid so that the animals can't open it up. We in the city are very happy with those. So 5-day work week, 1 day service. Yard waste.
Hold on 1 second. I think Mayor McKinley, you recognize?
No, I think Commissioner Burdick is just going through her comments. I'll wait till she's done.
Okay.
I thought we were getting consensus on.
Let's do one at a time.
The chair wanted consensus on these.
On the solid, so we did the pre-qualification requirements. Next is the solid waste services. Let's get consensus on whether we want to do automated, semi-automated, or manual 5-day work week.
Okay, let me just get one comment then, Mr. Chairman, on the record on the pre-qualifications. It does give me some concern that they just have to have one customer right now. So would prefer length of service or something in there, but I see I'm the odd man out on that one, but just want to get that on the record. Thank you.
Okay. All right, solid waste services. Let's get consensus on whether we want to go automated, semi-automated, or manual, and the number of days of service.
I would support the 5-day and 5-day work week and the 1 day of service.
Okay.
I would support that as well as somebody who's got one of those big buckets. I can't remember the last time I took my trash out twice a week. And but those trucks are still coming through and driving when they don't need to.
Right.
And I also think it's a huge benefit to the families of the employees that work for these industries.
Okay. Commissioner Abrams?
Pre-qualification requirements, I'll go with the staff recommendation. Solid waste services, if staff is telling me that you simply cannot accomplish automated 5-day with twice a week pickup, then I do see the benefits of the automated and the 5-day a week sufficiently to supersede the 2-day service. What else?
Okay.
The yard waste services, I would agree with staff recommendation. And I mean, if are we getting into the demonstration project?
Not yet. We're going. Okay.
As our choice with solid waste, 3 cubic yards?
Not yet. We're not there yet. Hold on a second. Just one. So with the solid waste services, we're all in agreement to automated 5 days work week and 1 day of service. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Berger?
I do go along with that. However, we may need to make an exception for Christmas because those containers fill up really quickly.
I think that they had said that on Thanksgiving and Christmas. Mm-hmm. All right, so we have consensus on automated 5 days work week and pick up once a week. Next is yard waste services. 3 cubic yards or 6 cubic yards?
Y'all are killing me on this one.
You in particular.
If anyone wants to give up a portion of their district and trade me with the acreage and go out to Indian Trail Improvement District and have this conversation, this is one I simply could not support, and because of such a huge portion of my district needs this service, more than 3 cubic yards, unless we were to do something a couple of times a year, you know, like extra days pre-hurricane cleanup, or be flexible, but as it's written here, I can't support it.
Mr. Chair.
We can look
Commissioner
at that.
Berger, you recognize?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My alternative that would be to go to the 6 cubic yards because most ordinary people are not going to have 3 cubic yards, and it gives Mayor McKinley and her area the comfort level that they'll be able to put out what they put out all the time anyway. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're in some of the developments, you're not going to have that kind of yard waste because a lot of it's done by your associations.
Well, I can guarantee you the gentleman who spoke about the complaints in that district, they're coming from my district. And they do push the limits on the 6 cubic yards as it is. So if we were to reduce that, I mean, the number of complaints we're going to get are going to go through the roof, and we're going to end up having to do special calls out there anyway. So I would support just keeping it at the 6 cubic yards, not making that change.
Mr. Hammond, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Whether we were to go with 3 or 6, I do believe that in the future we're going to have to take a look at some type of an enforcement, whether we get code enforcement or somebody involved, because even if we go to 3 with, you know, a very aggressive education system, folks are still going to put the stuff out there, and it's going to be how do we address it. As was mentioned, what we typically do now is if there's 50 cubic yards out there, they'll pick up 6. The homeowner will come home and they'll look at the pile, and it's hard for them to distinguish that anything's been taken at all. And so we get into these back and forth issues of whether it was picked up, whether it wasn't, and it puts, you know, a burden on staff. I agree that if that huge pile is put out there initially, that should be some kind of, or should initiate some kind of code enforcement action, because it's above and beyond what the rule, whatever we establish as far as 3 cubic yards or 6 cubic yards is. And we'll do our best efforts to make sure people are educated, but I think most people know the difference between 6 yards and 50. I think they're taking advantage of the system. Just as a comment.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Pelowitz, you recognize.
Yes, I would like to add to that. If the board was to consider to staying with the 6 yards, it would really help if we could change the way that it is presented to the hauler, and that is to look at containerizing the loose material and bundling, tying and bundling the longer, the 6-foot branches, palm fronds, and that sort of thing. That's the real burden is you've got an individual who's on the ground out there who's picking material up off the ground all day long. Clamshell trucks are great, but they're not efficient. Perhaps we could step in a direction of improving the way it's presented at the curb to make the collection a little easier.
Commissioner Burdick, you recognize.
Wow. Having to bundle up like with a rope, you're talking about when people rake leaves and things like that, and the trees, they'd have to put the leaves in a bucket and tie up the trees. And they would have to tie them up in a weight that is easy for the gentleman to go out there and lift it and throw it into the back end of a truck, correct?
Correct, and we have those guidelines today. Imagine going down the road in a rear load truck, picking up by hand, grabbing material, and I say this because I've been there. There's fire ants, there's all kinds of things, and you're picking this up by hand, home after home. So I agree with Dan, if we are going to stay with a 6 cubic yard, we should tighten up the requirements and how we place it at the curb, and that would go a long way to allowing them to be more efficient, grabbing the material under 50 pounds and throwing it in. And that's not uncommon in other counties and cities. They require bundling under 50 pounds.
What does 6 cubic yards look like? Give me like the refrigerators.
Three standard refrigerators side by side, so it's quite a bit of material.
So if we were to go, I'm looking for options. If we were to go to the 3 cubic yards, that's easier. Would they still have to tie them up?
Yes. Well, we'd require that. The intention of yard waste pickup county-wide years ago was for normal household maintenance of trimming, cutting branches about 4 inches.
Right, right.
Today, people cut down trees.
Right.
Could
we possibly look at if it was the 3 cubic yards, and then maybe quarterly they would go out, and would they have the claw truck at that time to go out and pick up these large 10 cubic yards?
I think what was proposed today, staff needs to go back and take a look at, because a lot of the SBEs and those types of companies have the clamshells. I think that's a great suggestion that we look at maybe twice a year to have people that can put out before hurricane season and run these trucks and provide that service. And maybe then if we did that twice a year, on the regular schedule would be the 3 cubic yard, if the board would want to look at that.
Do we need to make that decision today, or can you go out, can you meet?
We can come back.
And then go back out to the communities that are most affected?
Why don't we do that?
And give them an option?
Yeah, why don't we, if it's up to the board, we come back in August. We take a look at this, gives us an opportunity to talk with haulers and everything. But I think it's a great opportunity for small minority business too to operate their equipment that we know they have today and provide a nice service for the communities. So it may be something that is a win for everybody.
Okay.
Commissioner Kerner, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is it possible to have in a specific service area a higher level 6 cubic yards in one service area, and then in other service areas it'd be 3 cubic yards, so that there's less subsidies going on?
There's nothing that would prohibit that.
Is that something that we should be looking into? Because it seems like the complaints and the abuses occur primarily in one service area.
Well, I think that's something we should certainly be open to evaluating, yes. And if it's the board's direction to do that, we'll take a look at it, and we could certainly do that.
Okay. Seems like a logical.
I would support, doing a hybrid. The areas that doesn't need the 6, they would just do a 3, and then the other areas do a 6.
Kings Point doesn't need 6. Right.
Commissioner Vallish, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to make sure it's infeasible to actually price this, because it seems like there's a lot of inequities. I think John said that the haulers are putting, they're penalizing the people that don't generate yard waste by forcing them to absorb the costs of the pickup of the yard waste. With all the automation that's coming online. And it seems like we do measure it in some instances because we leave waste behind. I mean, I think the people who are doing the pickup estimate, this is about, what we're allowed to pick up, and we can't pick up the rest. So I know it would be tedious to sort of record everybody's, generation of waste, but it seems like making this a user fee rather than a generalized fee that is spread over the entire contract would be much more fair, because and I would support, because the people in Jupiter Farms would not like it if I didn't support 6 cubic yards, just like Mayor McKinley is talking about people in the acreage, but if we could ask them to pay for it, knowing that they're a larger generator of that type of material, it seems like everybody would be, I don't know if they'd be happy about that, but it seems like it would be a much more fair and equitable way to handle this.
Mm-hmm. Right. In response to that, that is essentially what we have proposed, is that we provide a base level of service at 3 or 6 cubic yards per household per week, and then an $8 per cubic yard rate for what's larger than that.
Sorry.
So that's essentially what we have proposed. We have a similar program now. The resident isn't forced to use the hauler to pick that material up. They could choose to have the person to cut it, haul it away, which is what we would prefer generally. But yes, absolutely, that is possible, and that was our approach, was to have a base level of service with a user fee on top.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Were we complicating it by having you meet together and then go out to the community?
I think it's always a good idea for us to meet with the community. So, I mean, I think it's a good idea, and we have, our intent was to come back to you in August with the complete picture for your final approval, and we have time between now and the end of August to do that.
I can support your recommendation.
Okay. And then lastly, which is the competitive business demonstration project.
That's on page.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Abrams, you reckon?
I think the key there, at least for me, is the discussion that we've had about what the cost of it would be, and we really need to, and I think staff alluded to this earlier, go out and gather more information about what the cost would be. And I agree with Ms. White. She doesn't think I agree with her on anything, but that it's important to see how the prices are reflected against our other zones. There are some impediments to doing that, I think the staff raised, but I mean, for me, I'm willing to keep this alive and pursue it further if, based on further financial information coming back.
Mr. Pelowitz, is there a way for the RFP, for us to decide the RFP and the hard bid at the same time? So in that way, we're making the decisions on the same day, so we would know the price for all of the zones, and then in that way we can make a decision because, you know, it is an RFP and we can negotiate, you know, the prices. You know, for instance, if the price for if we want it to be the same price for Zone 2, you know, this board can make that decision for it to not be above the price of Zone 2 on that same day. Couldn't we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. We could do it on the same day. We were simply proposing do it earlier so you knew what it was. But Ms. White is correct, is you're not going to know what the other bids look like. They may all be high.
No, that's the reason why I just think we would do them all on the same day, and this board would make the final decision, and we could negotiate whatever price that we want for that zone 6, and we can make sure that it matches the price of Zone 2 if we wanted to.
Yes, you're correct. I mean, there's no guarantee it's going to exactly match, but at least you'll know what they are at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Zone 2 match 6. No, I'm just joking. We don't know what the numbers will be.
Right. And I do want to add just one point. We don't know what the numbers are going to come in at. Our job is to trying to structure this thing to achieve maximum competition in this area. If you have enough competitors out there, the prices will, and they know they're out there, the prices will be more competitive, and it would put downward pressure on rates. So our challenge now is to structure this RFP in a way that it doesn't inadvertently discourage folks from proposing.
Okay. So have we agreed on, in terms of it could be a joint venture or it could be a standalone, if I'm correct? Yes. All right. Commissioner Valasche, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I still, though, have some problems with the discretionary nature of the board's acceptance of the RFP. I mean, I think if we think it's a good idea to create this zone, and you know, whoever the successful bidder is, you know, should get a chance, regardless of what their bid is. I mean, if we've decided that this is a good approach to being more inclusive, then I think we should decide now that whichever bid comes in as the winning bid goes forward and gets to provide the service, not where we have a veto over that after we've looked at everybody else's bid. I'm not comfortable with doing it that way.
I understand. What I would state is we typically in all of our procurement documents, we state that the authority reserves the option to reject any and all bids. There may be, if they came in at $100 a month, fairly sure
but
you'd
what
want to
we're
reject
doing
that.
here is different because we'd be abolishing that zone. But you know, it's not like we would just say we're rejecting the bid. What we're doing in effect is saying, no, we're just going to go back to the 4-zone system, and this was a nice idea, but too bad.
You're correct.
But is there, give me 1 second, Dan, is it possible that we can include in the bid that it cannot exceed, you know, the Zone 2, or we can make that decision, you know, when it comes to us?
I don't know that you could really do that, because the issue is we do expect it might be a little more than Zone 2, even if it was bid without all the program included in it, because we did have this as a service area before, and it was higher than the service areas to the east. So it may be marginally higher. We would expect it to be a couple of dollars. Our concern is that if it comes in significantly higher. Our rates are much more common now than they've ever been. There were times where we had wide deviations in the prices that people were paying. Yep. And we've seen those before, and those were acceptable before. So I'm saying that there probably is a reasonable, I mean, not acceptable, I know the look, but we went with those before, and we did that before. Yeah. In this case, look, I think if we structure this thing right and we open it up the way you seem to be pushing it to allow for joint venture or prime bidder, I think there should be significant competition. I have some thoughts about how to adjust the evaluation criteria to maybe facilitate more competitiveness of smaller firms relative to the bigger firms. We can come back with some modifications in in that criteria, but the direction, if the direction is to open this up to allow other than joint venture, I think we can work with that, and you've given us something to work with over the next couple of weeks.
Okay. Commissioner Burdick, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you're right, there was some, because we had 11 zones, one of my zones was $200 more than the average of the other zones. My question goes to that 20% that we're looking at. And it's 10 and 10. 10 SBE and 10% WMBE. In these zones 1 or 2 with the large vegetation, you said that there might be greater opportunity of our MWBEs to participate. So that would increase that they might be able to get to that 10%. If some of the vendors get to that 20%, does that require all the vendors that are applying to reach that 20%?
Generally, what would happen with the waiver process is if you have, let's say, for example, you have 4 vendors that are all making the 20%, and you've got one that comes in and they're at 12, they would be required to meet the 20. They would not generally be granted a waiver. If you had one firm that's able to make the 20%, the 10 and the 10, then that puts a lot of pressure on the other ones to do it, because our inclination at that point would be to say, if we've got one or more vendors that are able to achieve the goal, then how do you grant a waiver to those vendors who are not able to achieve the goal?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And then I have one other question. Okay. Are we allowing our vendors to successfully bid more than one zone?
Yes, we allow vendors that have to qualify for a maximum award to be awarded at most 2 zones. That doesn't include, it wouldn't include the smaller zone,
okay,
either of the smaller zones. So they would be able to, if they wanted to bid on the joint venture area, they could be awarded that as well.
Thank you.
Okay. We have no other cards. No other comments, so this meeting is adjourned.
Where are you going?
Oh, good Harvard Club. Go get lunch.
Oh, did they have
You're
a speaker?
welcome to join. No, I'm not. If you're a speaker, I know.